Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're here again, sifting through the source material you bring us, trying to chase down the truth, however hidden it might be.
Glad to be diving in.
So today we're tackling, well, it's a pretty heavy geopolitical subject. We've got this significant stack of research here, and it's all centered around let's say, a really provocative claim.
Yeah, the central argument is that for some very powerful groups in Washington, the Cold War didn't so much end as transform. Its structures, its profit motives, they just found new targets.
It wasn't just about ideology anymore, but this sustained push for unchallenged global military power.
Exactly. What the sources often refer to, borrowing that think tank phrase, as the American century, although it's more like global military supremacy if you unpack it.
Right. So our job today is to try and dissect how that's supposed to work according to these analyses. How do you actually pursue this? What's the term they use? Full spectrum dominance.
That's the one, full spectrum dominance. And the sources argue it involves, well, stealth, deception, lies, and even wars, all aimed at controlling the Eurasian heartland. You know, the big, resource-rich landmass.
And full spectrum dominance. That means everything, right? Land, sea, air.
Space, and maybe most importantly now, the information space, controlling the narrative.
Okay. So we're going to try and unpack the sort of psychological roots of modern regime change, look at how NGOs maybe became political tools, and touch on this shift towards perpetual warfare. That's pretty chilling.
It's a disturbing picture the sources paint, for sure.
And just a reminder for everyone listening, if you want to explore the original research and analysis behind our chat today, you can follow the threads over on X at official Urbanus.
Definitely worth checking out the source docs.
Okay, let's jump in. So 1991, the Soviet Union collapses. The sources argue Washington had a choice then.
A real fork-in-the-road moment, yeah. They could have gone for de-escalation, maybe dismantled NATO since Russia was dissolving the Warsaw Pact, focused on cooperation, trade across Eurasia.
But they didn't. The argument here is that they chose a different path, one defined by, and I'm quoting the sources, stealth, deception, lies, and wars. Why that path?
Well, the analysis points pretty directly towards, following the money. For the big players, huge oil companies, oil services like Halliburton, the whole military-industrial complex tied to the Pentagon, the Cold War was incredibly profitable.
So for them, it just kept going. Under a different name, maybe.
That's the contention. The goal shifted to laying the groundwork for an American empire, essentially, but without ever using that word. It had to be framed differently.
And this wasn't just abstract politics, it was about actual territory, wasn't it? These sources keep bringing up Sir Halford Mackinder. Why is a British geographer from over a century ago so important here?
Mackinder provided the geopolitical blueprint. His idea from back in 1904 was stark. Control the Eurasian heartland, primarily Russia and its surroundings, and you control the world island Eurasia and Africa. Control that, you control the world.
Simple as that?
Well, the logic was compelling to certain strategists. After 91, figures like Brzezinski heavily influenced U.S. policy, focusing on preventing any unified power, especially one centered on Russia, from emerging in Eurasia. Keep it fragmented.
And the most obvious way they did this, according to the material, was expanding NATO eastward.
Right. The sources are quite adamant that Washington broke promises made about not extending NATO. By 2008, there was huge pressure to get Ukraine and Georgia in.
Which looks like encirclement from Russia's perspective.
Exactly. It's aggressive encirclement. Bringing NATO right to Russia's borders threatens its economic lifelines, especially those crucial gas pipelines to Western Europe. It creates this immediate sense of vulnerability.
And things really came to a head in August 2008, didn't they? The Georgian invasion of South Ossetia. The timing itself is flagged in the research as odd.
Yeah, 8/8/08, the 8th day, 8th month, 8th year. The analysts highlight this, suggesting it's like those other significant dates, maybe 9/11, possibly hinting at something more than coincidence.
Suggesting these aren't just random flare-ups, but potentially planned, maybe even symbolically timed events.
That's the implication drawn in this research, yes. A layer of orchestration beneath the surface chaos.
Okay, so the goal is controlling Eurasia, keeping Russia and China from getting too close. But the old methods, like, say, the 1953 Iran coup, they got messy, right? Too obvious.
Very messy. Left fingerprints everywhere, led to blowback later on. So if you still need to destabilize rivals, push for regime change, you need a cleaner way. Warfare without sending in the Marines, basically.
And this is where the history of psychological operations comes in.
Precisely. The sources delve into some really dark history here.
Like the CIA's MK-ULTRA program. That stuff sounds like science fiction.
Unfortunately, it was very real. Experimenting with mind control, using LSD and other potent drugs on American citizens, often without their knowledge or consent.
Which led to suicides, didn't it?
It did. And the justification, according to these documents, was based on largely fabricated stories about North Korean brainwashing techniques. It was about developing offensive capabilities under a defensive pretext.
And this wasn't just the CIA. The British were involved, too. Tavistock Institute.
Right, Tavistock. Started way back in 1921 as the British military's psychological warfare unit. They studied, among other things, the breaking point of soldiers under extreme stress.
Okay, but how does studying stressed soldiers lead to overthrowing governments 50 years later? That seems like a leap.
It's about understanding group dynamics and stress responses. A key figure, Kurt Lewin from Tavistock, ended up at MIT after the war and essentially founded modern social psychology, but the direct link comes later.
Go on.
Well, in 1967, another Tavistock researcher, Dr. Fred Emery, made this observation about swarming adolescents at rock concerts. You know, the way large crowds could move almost as one, seemingly leaderless but highly energized.
Yeah, I can picture that.
Emery theorized that this decentralized, almost chaotic-seeming behavior could be studied, refined, and potentially weaponized. Used to destabilize and bring down governments perceived as hostile?
Wait, seriously. Rock concert crowd behavior as a template for political action? That's incredible.
It sounds wild, I know. But the sources argue this concept was then picked up and developed, particularly by the Rand Corporation. They saw how networked tech mobile phones, SMS messaging could facilitate this.
Creating a new kind of conflict?
Yeah.
Decentralized, maybe presented as nonviolent, using swarming for regime change?
Exactly. Manufactured chaos that looks spontaneous. And the prime example they dissect is Serbia in 2000, the removal of Milosevic.
Which the sources claim the U.S. government basically bought for $41 million.
Yes, the figure cited, yeah. Described as the first poll-driven, focus group-tested revolution.
$41 million? What did that even pay for? The sources mentioned spray paint and stickers.
Huh. Yeah, some of it did. Apparently, U.S. taxpayers funded 5,000 cans of spray paint for anti-Milosevic graffiti and 2.5 million stickers saying, "Gotov J, he's finished."
But the bulk of the money must have gone elsewhere. Training, support.
Oh, absolutely. It funded influence campaigns, training for activists, logistical support, all channeled through NGOs financed by the U.S. Congress and State Department, like the National Endowment for Democracy, the NED.
Ah, the NED. So the idea is, when direct CIA action became too politically risky, these NGOs stepped in. Plausible deniability.
That's the core insight, yes. The NED was founded in the 80s, reportedly on the advice of CIA Director Bill Casey himself, specifically to do openly what the CIA used to do covertly.
So if the CIA hands out anti-government stickers, it's an act of war. But if the NED does it...
It's democracy promotion, a much friendlier label for interfering in another country's politics.
And Freedom House is another one mentioned in this context.
Yeah, similar function according to this analysis. Founded originally as a pro-NATO outfit. Notably, it was led for a time by former CIA Director James Woolsey, who famously called the Cold War World War III. These NGOs become instruments of soft warfare.
Okay, let's pivot slightly. U.S. missile defense. Let's put the official story on our truth meter. 2001, the U.S. pulls out of the ABM Treaty to build the system. Officially, it was about defending against Iran.
Right, that was the public justification, yes. Defense against rogue states like Iran.
But the sources argue the physics don't line up.
They point to critiques, including from Putin back in 2007. He argued placing missile interceptors in Eastern Europe made no sense ballistically for stopping Iranian missiles aimed at the U.S. It was like his analogy was using your right hand to scratch your left ear. Just awkward.
So the suggestion is the real target was always Russia, its nuclear deterrent.
That's the conclusion these authors draw. That Iran was, essentially, a convenient cover story for deploying systems aimed at neutralizing Russia's strategic capabilities, an offensive move disguised as defense.
Which ties back to the bigger picture, these color revolutions, the NGO activity, the military posturing. It's all part of a strategy of strategic denial.
Yeah.
Keeping rivals away from resources.
Exactly. Especially aimed at China and Russia. We see a clear example, the sources argue, in the Darfur conflict in Sudan.
Oh, so?
Well, the huge international human rights campaign focusing on alleged genocide in Darfur, and the U.S. was basically the only government using that specific term, kicked off right around the time massive new oil reserves were found there.
And China had secured rights to explore that oil.
China had major contracts, yes. The analysis suggests Washington then supported military actions by the dictator of neighboring Chad to destabilize Darfur, specifically to deny that oil to China, using human rights as a geopolitical tool for resource control.
Wow. Okay. And a similar pattern is suggested with Tibet and China.
Yes, using Tibet as leverage. The U.S. publicly honored the Dalai Lama in late 2007, increasing pressure on Beijing. And we know from declassified documents that the CIA funded the Tibetan exile movement quite heavily in the 60s.
And the NED picked up that funding later.
The NED continued supporting Tibetan groups, particularly around the sensitive time of the 2008 Beijing Olympics.
Why is Tibet so strategically important, beyond the human rights issues?
Two main reasons, according to the analysis. First, resources. The Khyden Basin in the Tibetan Plateau holds an estimated $1.8 trillion in minerals. Huge potential wealth.
And the second reason?
Water. Tibet is the source of 7 of Asia's largest rivers. Controlling the headwaters gives you incredible leverage over downstream nations, especially China and India. It's a massive geopolitical choke point.
So resource control, manufactured instability through swarming, strategic denial, it all rests on a foundation of military power, right? This idea of perpetual warfare.
Underpinned by doctrine, yes. The 2002 Bush Doctrine officially sanctioned preemptive military strikes, but then came Complan 8022 in 2004.
What was Complan 8022?
Approved by Defense Secretary Rumsfeld, it gave the president a prompt global strike capability, the power to launch potentially nuclear attacks very quickly anywhere in the world.
Based on what? An actual attack?
Based on the perception of an imminent threat. Crucially, the sources emphasize, this plan allowed bypassing traditional congressional approval for war.
Which effectively removes the main constitutional check on launching a war, especially a nuclear one.
That's the stark reality of it, yes. It centralizes immense offensive power based on intelligence assessments alone, which, as we know, can be flawed or manipulated.
Okay, let's try and synthesize this. The argument we've unpacked from these sources is this drive for full-spectrum dominance led to a system of continuous conflict. It uses these manufactured, seemingly nonviolent coups, the color revolutions, powered by psychological swarming tactics.
Disguised through these NGOs like NED and Freedom House, which act as a sort of acceptable face for covert foreign policy.
All aimed at controlling resources and denying them to rivals, particularly Russia and China. Is that a fair summary of the thesis?
I think that captures the core argument presented in the research, yes.
Yeah.
A perpetual motion machine of conflict and control.
And that brings us to this final, really unsettling point raised in the material. It concerns the Project for a New American Century, or PNAC.
Right, the think tank report from September 2000. Written by people who then became very senior figures in the Bush administration, Cheney, Rumsfeld.
And that report talked about the military transformation strategy they wanted. But it said implementing it would be difficult, it would be a long one.
Absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor, that's the direct quote cited.
A new Pearl Harbor needed to catalyze their military transformation plans.
That's what they wrote, a year before 9/11.
So the final, deeply uncomfortable question the sources leave you, the listener, with is this. Given how quickly things happened after 9/11, actions that seem to follow that PNAC playbook quite closely.
What does that statement about needing a new Pearl Harbor really imply?
What price might the power elite, as described in these sources, have been willing to contemplate to achieve their goal of global dominance? It forces you to re-examine the very foundations of the conflicts that have defined this century.
It's a heavy question, the ultimate unresolved question of that period, perhaps.
Definitely something to think about. If you want to dig deeper into the evidence and arguments, subscribe over at theofficialurban.substack.com for the full analysis.
And let us know what you think. What's your take on this shift from old-school coups to psychological swarming? Find us on X at @officialurbanus. Use the hashtag #UrbanOdysseyTruth.
We'll be back soon for another deep dive. Thanks for listening.